Let's start with the second part. Part 2 is applicable to CA in service. CA in service, there are two clauses only. Clause 1, a CA in service cannot share his salaries with someone. And clause 2, he cannot share the fees of someone. Suppose a CA in service is in a good position in a company, and he will have to take a decision where to make investment on behalf of company. He consulted one of the investment broker that I will make investment only through you, but whatever commission you are earning, certain portion should be passed on to me. If CA in service is earning in this way, in that case he will be subject to clause 2, part 2, first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. So there are two clauses. Number 1, a CA in service cannot share his salaries with someone. And number 2, he cannot share the fees of someone. In both the cases, part 2 of first schedule will become applicable. If we see the questions related with the same. A chartered accountant in service agree to entrust the work of investment broker to Mr. X on the specific understanding that 20% of the commission Mr. X earn would be paid to him. In this question we can clearly see he is CA in service and certain investment, suppose his company wanted to make, and he consulted one of the investment broker with the condition that whatever commission you are earning, 20% should be passed on to me. In that case, he is not sharing his salaries with someone, but he is sharing fees of someone. And as he is sharing fees of someone, clause 2, part 2 of first schedule will become applicable. The next question, Mr. C, a chartered accountant, hold a certificate of practice while in employment also. Recommend a particular lawyer to his employer in respect of a case. The lawyer, out of the professional fee received from the employer, paid a particular sum as a referral fee to Mr. C. It's a very good question, recently being asked in ICAS examination. He is CA in practice also as well as CA in service. So there is always a dilemma whether we should apply part 1 or we should apply part 2. Now he is referring a name of particular lawyer not to his client but to his employer. If he is referring this name of a lawyer to his client, we can be there in a part 1 because he would do it in a capacity of a CA in practice. But he referred the name of lawyer to his employer, so he is doing it in a capacity of employee, and that's why we will be outside part 1 but we will be within part 2. And afterwards that lawyer is sharing fees with that particular chartered accountant who is in employment, and that's why that chartered accountant would be covered under clause 2 of part 2 of first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. So this question is a good question in a way that he is CA in practice as well as he is CA in service. But he is not referring the name of lawyer to his client, but he is referring the name of lawyer to his employer. So he is referring in a capacity of employee, and that's why we are not applying part 1, rather we are applying part 2. Moving to the next part, that is part 3, which is known as CA in general. This part 3 is applicable to CA in general, whether he is in practice, whether he is in service, or whether he is not doing anything else. In all circumstances, part 3 will become applicable. Part 3 is having 3 clauses. Clause number 1 is saying, not being a fellow, style himself as a fellow. Once you become a chartered accountant, first of all you will apply for the membership and you will get one membership number from ICAI. Afterwards, if you want to go for a job, straight away you can start with a job. But suppose you want to go for a practice, you will have to apply for certificate of practice. Once you get certificate of practice, then only you can start with the practice. And as soon as you are getting certificate of practice, for the first 5 years, your status would be ACA, Associated Chartered Accountant. And after 5 years, your status would be FCA, that is Fellow Chartered Accountant. The similar concept is also there in CS, ACS and FCS. So, if you are not a fellow chartered accountant, still if you are disclosing yourself as a fellow chartered accountant, you would be subject to clause 1, part 3 of the first schedule. Part 3 is applicable to CA in general, whether he is in practice, whether he is in service, or if he is not in a practice or service, not engaged anywhere, still this part will become applicable, and that's why if you are not FCA, still if you are disclosing FCA yourself, in that case you are subject to clause 1 part 3 first schedule. There is no practical question related to this. The second clause, you are not giving information to ICI. Periodically, ICI, its council, its different committees may demand information from a chartered accountant, whether he's in a practice, whether he's in a service. We know that every year register of member is updated and we are paying the membership fees. At that time, we are providing certain information. But apart from that, many other information may be demanded by ICI from our side. If we are not providing this information to the ICI, in that case, clause 2 will become applicable. Clause 2 part 3 first schedule will become applicable. Now, certain practicals if we see related with this clause 2. Practical 1. A chartered accountant in practice, in spite repeated requests from the secretary of institute, fails to submit form 18. Is he liable for misconduct? Yes, institute is demanding a particular form from ICI. From chartered accountant, then it should be provided. And if it is not being provided, it is not giving information to ICI, and not giving information to ICI will attract clause 2 part 3 first schedule. Form 18 is becoming applicable when article clerk is a minor. In that situation, form 18 is becoming applicable, but this information ICI is demanding from a chartered accountant, but it is not being provided, and that's why it would be treated as violation of clause 2 part 3 first schedule. Moving to the next question. CADD, a chartered accountant employed as a paid assistant with a chartered accountant firm on 31st December 2008, he leaves the service of the firm. Despite many reminders from ICI, he fails to reply regarding the date of leaving the service of the firm. As we know, we are learning right now part 3, and part 3 is not only applicable to CA in practice, it is also applicable to CA in service. So being CA in service, you need to provide the information which is demanded by ICI, and as you are not providing the information which is demanded by ICI, you left the job. Now the ICI is requesting, demanding from your side the date when you left the job. This information need to be provided. If it is not being provided, it would be clearly treated as violation of clause 2 part 3 first schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Mr. G, while applying for certificate of practice, did not fill in the columns which solicit information about his engagement in other occupation or business while he was indeed engaged in a business. When you are applying for certificate of practice, you need to fill a prescribed form. You need to mention the firm name which you are expecting. At the same time, information demanded by ICI need to be submitted, and one of the information, are you engaged in any other business or profession? You need to mention either yes or no. You are in fact engaged in some business, and which you are not mentioning means what? In this information, if not being provided to ICI, it would be treated as violation of clause 2 part 3 first schedule. Not providing information to ICI doesn't mean that ICI is calling for some specific information and you are not providing. It also means that some form which needs to be submitted to ICI, where we need to fill certain details and we are intentionally not filling, that also indicate we are not giving information to the ICI, and in that case also clause 2 part 3 first schedule will become applicable. So second clause is talking about you are not giving information to ICI, its council, its committees. In that case, this clause will become applicable. Moving to the third clause. Third clause is talking about a chartered accountant in practice or service or otherwise, because it is falling within part 3. It is applicable to CA in general. Is giving false particulars to the outsiders. Is giving false particulars to the outsiders either in a biodata or in a profile. If you are giving certain wrong information in a biodata or profile to any outsider, I am not talking to ICI, to any outsider, in that case clause 3 part 3 first schedule will become applicable. Clause 3 part 3 first schedule. So clause 2 was talking about we are not giving information to ICI, and clause 3 is talking about we are giving false particular to outsider. Don't you think so? We can also provide false particulars to the ICI, but that will fall in a second schedule. Here there are two clauses. Clause 2 is saying we are not giving information to ICI, and clause 3 is saying we are giving false particulars to the outsider. Now if we see the practicals related with the same. Practical number 1. Mr. Everyday issued a certificate of consumption of newsprint to be furnished to the registrar of newspaper describing himself as a chartered accountant when his application for enrollment as a member in practice was pending with the institute. Now, this question in which we are giving certain information to some newspaper agency that I am having COP. In fact, at that time, a chartered accountant was not having COP. He simply applied for it and he didn't get that COP from ICI. So he provided intentionally wrong information not to ICI but to an outsider, and if he is giving wrong information to the outsider, in that case clause 3 part 3 first schedule will become applicable. So it would be treated as violation of clause 3 part 3 first schedule. So in total there are 3 clauses under part 3. In total there are 3 clauses. Part 3 is applicable to CA in general. Clause 1 was saying not being a fellow, style himself as fellow. Clause 2 was saying not giving information to ICI, and clause 3 was saying you are giving false particular to any outsider. So part 1 was applicable to CA in practice, part 2 was applicable to CA in service, part 3 was applicable to CA in general. Now we will move for part 4, which is applicable for the other misconduct and which is not a professional misconduct. If you make a violation of Chartered Accountant Act, it would be treated as professional misconduct. But if you make violation of any other act other than Chartered Accountant Act, still Chartered Accountant Act can punish you under the head, not under the head of professional misconduct, but under the head of other misconduct. There are 2 clauses related with this. Clause number 1 is saying that if you are being convicted by any civil or criminal court for a term less than 6 months, then you will be covered under the head other misconduct under part 4 of first schedule. Less than 6 months, yes. Suppose in a negotiable instrument act, check is bouncing, and because of that a chartered accountant is finding imprisonment of 4 months. At that time he is being convicted by a civil or criminal court, but at the same time institute can also take action against him, not under the head of professional misconduct but under the head of other misconduct under clause 1 part 4 first schedule. And the second clause is saying that if you are doing something which is deriving disreputation to ICI, your act, your attitude, your work is resulting into disreputation to the ICI, in that particular case clause 2 part 4 first schedule will become applicable. So there are 2 clauses under part 4. First clause is saying you are being convicted by civil or criminal court less than 6 months. So can't we be convicted for more than 6 months? Yes, but that will fall in a second schedule, not in a first schedule. And second, we are doing something which is deriving disreputation to ICAI. Now I can say the simple understanding of other misconduct, you are not making violation of Chartered Accountant Act, a professional activity, but you are doing something wrong in other act, maybe Negotiable Instrument Act or the Contract Act or anywhere else, and ultimately where you are facing some action, the same time ICI can also take action against you. Who can be covered under this other misconduct? A CA in practice, a CA in service, as well as a chartered accountant who is not in a practice, not in a service. So we can say this other misconduct is falling in a category of CA in general, which was applicable to part 3 as well. Now there are certain illustrative cases which are already being established by ICI and based on which they have already asked the questions in past, where they have covered a chartered accountant under the head of other misconduct. One of the example that if you are being an office bearer of ICI and if you are doing misappropriation of any asset or funds, then you will not be covered under the head professional misconduct, rather you will be covered under the head other misconduct. In a similar way, we have a right of lien. We can exercise right of lien on the records and books of accounts of client, but without reason it is not being permitted. Without reason if we are doing, in that case we are not covered under the head professional misconduct, rather we will be covered under the head other misconduct. In a similar way, if a chartered accountant is using wrong methods for the purpose of granting loan for his own purpose or for getting some work or for granting loan for his client in any way with the bank, if he is using wrong means, in that case anything wrongly done with a bank would be covered under this other misconduct and not under the head of professional misconduct. So these are 2-3 illustrative examples. There are many other examples given in module as well as in our book as well as in PM, but these are the 2-3 illustrative cases where they have applied the other misconduct. The first case was applicable, being office bearer, you are making misappropriation of the funds, being office bearer of ICI. Second, you are exercising right of lien unnecessarily. And third one, you are using wrong method for sanctioning loan for your own purpose or for the purpose of your client, or doing something wrong with the bank. In that particular case, this other misconduct will become applicable. Now let's see few of the practicals related with this other misconduct. Practical number 1. Mr. R, a chartered accountant in practice, has been elected as the treasurer of Regional Council of the Institute. The Regional Council had organized an international tour through a tour operator during the year for its member. During the audit of the Regional Council, it was found that Mr. R had received a personal benefit of 50,000 from the tour operator. Recently, we have seen few illustrated cases where chartered accountant would be covered under the head of other misconduct, and where the first case, being office bearer of ICI, if you are making misappropriation of fund or any mischief, then it won't be covered under the head professional misconduct, rather it would be covered under the head other misconduct. Now other misconduct in a fourth part is having two clauses, clause 1 and clause 2. Clause 1 is becoming applicable where any civil or criminal court is taking action less than 6 months against a chartered accountant, and clause 2 is becoming applicable where you are doing something which is bringing disreputation to ICI. You remember, students, all questions related with other misconduct is being applied with clause 2, part 4, first schedule, because there is not a single question where a chartered accountant convicted neither by less than 6 months nor by more than 6 months, and that's why you are not applying any time clause 1. Every time we are going to apply clause 2, part 4, first schedule. Moreover, in PM, at certain places they have mentioned clause 2, part 4, first schedule, and in certain places they have mentioned section 22 of the Chartered Accountant Act. So, but we have taken only one standard everywhere. Whenever that's a matter of other misconduct, we have applied clause 2, part 4, first schedule, because we are not applying section 22, and second, we are not applying clause 1 because it would become applicable when you are being convicted for a term less than 6 months. Moving to the second question, but before that let me confirm that in this particular question he will be held guilty not under the head of professional misconduct but under the head of other misconduct under clause 2, part 4, first schedule. Second question. Mr. Prakash was an auditor of a firm, Mr. Supma Corporation. He retained the books of account and voucher files and failed to hand over them to the firm regardless of repeated requests. Is he guilty of professional misconduct? In current case, I want to say he will be held guilty not under the head professional misconduct but under the head of other misconduct. Right of lien we can exercise, but right of lien we cannot exercise without reason. Right of lien we can exercise only in 4 situations. Number 1, the books of account must be belonging to client. Number 2, he must have given to us. Number 3, audit must have been done. And number 4, if the fees is outstanding, not otherwise. Without reason, if you are exercising right of lien, the illustrative case, if you can remember, without reason if you are exercising, it won't be covered under the head professional misconduct, rather it would be covered under the head other misconduct. And even within other misconduct, we can say clause 2, part 4 of first schedule will become applicable. Moving to the next question. A chartered accountant availed a term loan of 10 lakhs from a nationalized bank for furnishing his office. He issued 2 checks for 1 lakh each towards repayment of the loan. Checks were dishonored with the remark referred to the drawer. Is the chartered accountant liable for misconduct? In a current case, he repaid the loan, but for that purpose the check is being dishonored. Now, Negotiable Instrument Act will come into play, where section 138 of the Negotiable Instrument Act can become applicable if and only if the check is dishonored because of the insufficiency of fund and not otherwise. It is not being clarified in the question, but it is apparently clear that he has made a violation of any other act other than the Chartered Accountant Act. Now, check if dishonored because of the difference in signature or difference in amount or difference in some name or date, in that case no clause will become applicable. But because of insufficiency of fund, if the check is dishonored, the negotiable instrument act section 138 will become applicable, and at the same time other misconduct will also come into its play, and where clause 2 part 4 first schedule will become applicable. So we need to observe the reason of dishonor of the check is what, if and only if it is insufficiency of fund, then only clause 2 part 4 first schedule will become applicable and not otherwise. Moving to the next question. Mr. DD, a chartered accountant in practice, approached a manager of a nationalized bank for a loan of 25 lakhs. He has also informed the manager that if the loan is sanctioned, the income tax return of the manager and the staff will be filed without charging any fees as quid pro quo for the loan sanction. Recently, we learned within the illustration of other misconduct, if you are using wrong methods for getting loan sanction for yourself, your client, or any sort of mischief with a bank, in that particular case, other misconduct will become applicable. In a current case, you are saying if you are sanctioning my loan, I will file your income tax return freely for the entire staff. So you are making wrong methods for the purpose of granting your loan sanction. In that case, other misconduct would become applicable and you would be covered under clause 2, part 4, first schedule. It's fixed. We are not mentioning anywhere section 22, which is also being mentioned somewhere in PM. But in PM, somewhere they are mentioning section 22, somewhere they are mentioning clause 2, part 4, first schedule. But we have kept only one standard and we are applying clause 2, part 4, first schedule. Moving to the next question. Mr. UN, a chartered accountant, had an account with a bank. The normal balance in this bank remained at a level below 25,000. Bank credited this account with a check of 2,50,000 belonging to another account holder. When Mr. UN came to know about this, he withdrew the amount of rupees 2,75,000 and closed the bank account. After 1 year, the bank noticed the mistake and claimed 2,75,000 with interest. Mr. UN contested this claim. Can the bank approach the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India for disciplinary action against Mr. UN? What has happened in this particular case is not suitable to the character of a chartered accountant. Why Institute introduced other misconduct which is not a professional misconduct? Because they expect you maintain the highest standard not only in the professional life but also in your personal life. Here, by mistake, bank credited certain amount, you withdraw that amount and then after you close your bank account. This is not suitable to the character of the chartered accountant and this is a mischief done with the bank, and that's why definitely in this particular case, clause 2, part 4, first schedule will become applicable and he will be covered with the head of other misconduct. Moving to the next question. YKS and Company, a proprietorship firm of chartered accountant, was appointed as a concurrent auditor of a bank. YKS used his influence for getting some check purchase and then after failed to repay the loan and overdraft. Again, this is also again a situation related with a bank, and any mischief with a bank, any wrong thing done with a bank is always being covered under the head other misconduct and not under the head of professional misconduct. So again here, clause 2, part 4, first schedule will become applicable under the head of other misconduct. Now, these are the questions related with the other misconduct which were falling in a part 4. Part 4 other misconduct is being bifurcated in two parts. Clause 1 and clause 2. You are doing something which is deriving disreputation to ICI, that is clause 2. And clause 1 was you are being convicted by any civil or criminal court for a term less than 6 months. But in every question we have applied clause 2, part 4, first schedule. And we had few illustrative cases like misappropriation of funds or assets by the office bearer of ICI. Second, we are doing some mischief with the bank. Third, we are exercising right of lien without reason. There are many other illustrative cases given in ICI's module as well as in PM as well as in our book. In total, we have covered the first schedule. First schedule we are having 4 parts. All parts we have covered, all clauses we have covered. If I give you a recall of all parts, first schedule, part 1 applicable to CA in practice, clause 1. If a CA in practice allowing someone else to use his firm name. Clause 2 is sharing fees with others. Clause 3 is sharing fees of others. Clause 4 with whom he can make partnership within India, outside India. Clause 5 if he is generating work through wrong means wrong person. Clause 6 advertisement, personal communication appearing for interview circular. Clause 7 that is disclosure of professional achievement or using any designation other than chartered accountant. Clause 8 communication with previous auditor in writing. Clause 9, without observing requirement of section 139, 140, 141, 142 of the Companies Act. Clause 10, fees contingent upon future finding. Clause 11, you cannot engage in any other business or profession. Clause 12, who can sign the auditor's report. Part 2, applicable to CA in service. Clause 1, you cannot share your salaries with someone. Clause 2, you cannot share the fees of someone. Part 3, applicable to CA in general, 3 clauses. First, not being a fellow, style himself as fellow. Second, not giving information to ICI. Third, giving false particulars to the outsider. Part 4, other misconduct, 2 clauses. Number 1, you are being convicted for a term less than 6 months by any civil or criminal court. And clause 2, you are doing something which is deriving disreputation to ICI. Within this journey of first schedule, we also learn 4 different regulations. Regulation 53A, which was there under clause 2. Regulation 53B, which was there under clause 4, Regulation 192, which was there under clause 10, and Regulation 190 capital A, which was there under clause 11 of part 1 of the first schedule. In this way, we are ending with the discussion of the first schedule. Now we are moving for the second schedule. Let's start with the second schedule. Second schedule, where part 1 is applicable to CA in practice. There are 10 clauses related with this. You remember that clauses we are writing in numeric. Part 1, 2, 3, 4 we are always writing in Roman number, and first schedule, second schedule we are writing by words. Clause 1 is talking about a CA in practice need to maintain confidentiality. He cannot disclose the confidential information related with client to anyone else. He can break this confidentiality only in 2 situations permitted by client or demanded by court of law. Someone has provided his confidential information by reposing trust on you, and if you are disclosing this confidential information to someone else, in that case it would be treated as a breach of trust. During our discussions of essays, we have also learned that confidentiality is one of the fundamental principles for a chartered accountancy profession, and that's why if a chartered accountant is disclosing his confidential information, in that case he will be subject to clause 1, part 1 of the second schedule. We know that part 1 is always applicable to CA in practice, where clause 1 is related with the confidentiality clause. If we see the practicals related with the same one by one. Practical 1. Mr. Parekh, a chartered accountant, was invited by the Chamber of Commerce to present a paper in a symposium on the issues facing Indian leather industry. During the course of his presentation, he shared some of the vital information of his client's business under the impression that it will help the nation to compete with the other countries at the international level. Many a time, a chartered accountants are becoming a part of any conference and where they are presenting the papers. At the time of presenting paper, you need to be careful that you do not disclose the confidential information related with your client. Here, in a good faith, he provided this information to the audience in present of him, because of the fact that if this information is being made available to the public, it can help the nation to compete at the international level. But still, he made a breach of trust with his client, and that's why he would be subject to clause 1, part 1 of the second schedule. You can break the confidentiality only in 2 situations permitted by client and demanded by court of law. Moving to the next question. XYZ Company Limited has applied to a bank for a loan facility. The bank, on studying the financial statement of the company, noticed that you are the auditor and request you to come at the bank for a discussion. In the course of discussion, the bank asked for your opinion regarding the company and also asked for detailed information regarding the few items in the financial statement. The information is available in your working papers file. What should be your response and why? This situation we are facing every now and then. Many a time we are representing case of our client in a bank and where we are trying to get loan sanction for him, where certain information is already being provided with the bank, and banking is knowing that this chartered accountant is handling this matter. Now they are calling us for providing certain further information. That information is already there within our working paper file, but should be provided without asking client? Not at all. We can disclose the confidential information of client only if permitted by client and demanded by court of law, and bank is not a court of law, so we can't disclose this information, and still if it is being disclosed, it would be treated as violation of clause 1, part 1 of the second schedule. Next question. A chartered accountant in practice was engaged by a businessman to represent him before the tax authorities on current matter, and in the course of such employment, he came across certain documents pointing to commission of tax frauds in the preceding year for which the client was not represented by him, is the member liable to disclose the existence and the contents of the document to the tax authorities? You remember, during the course of audit, many a time we come across the certain taxation matters related with the client, which are the confidential information of client. It is related with the preceding year. Should we provide this information to the tax authorities? Not at all. In this situation, number one, we should maintain confidentiality. Number two, we should advise him, disclose this fact on your own. Number three, we should not assist him in any way. Number four, we should see the possible effect on the truth and fairness. And number five, as far as possible, we should withdraw from the engagement. But the first requirement, we need to maintain the confidentiality. And if we don't maintain the confidentiality, and if we disclose this information to the tax authorities, we would be covered under clause 1 of part 1 of the second schedule. An auditor of a chemical industry, Abhaya, becomes aware of a secret production process of the company developed at an enormous cost. She described the same in detail to her brother, little aware that she will take advantage of this information to start a similar industry on his own. This is not acceptable. Such kind of work many a time may be conducted by a CA in practice who is engaging in a project finance work. During the course of handling project finance work of someone, he will come to know about from raw material to market. So he may use this information for his self purpose or for his relative. But in that way he is doing a breach of trust with the client. In a current case, certain confidential process she described to her brother with the intention that he can take the advantage. But she did a breach of trust with the client, and that's why she would be covered under the head clause 1 of part 1 of the second schedule under the ground of confidentiality. Moving to the next question. Starting with the next clause. The second clause is related with certification without examination of financial statement. If a chartered accountant in practice is certifying any financial statement without carrying necessary examination, in that case he would be covered under clause 2 of part 1 of the second schedule. You remember, many a time chartered accountant are getting tax audit work on a last day, whether he should accept or not. If he's accepting, he won't get a chance to verify anything. He will straight away certify. And if he's certifying without verifying that financial statement, then he would be covered under this particular clause 2. So this is applicable in a situation where a chartered accountant is certifying any information, any financial statement without examination. There is no specific practical question related with this clause 2 here, but we will discuss question related with clause 2 at some other place, as and when we will discuss clause 7 and clause 8, because in some way it is related with clause 7 and clause 8. But a chartered accountant in practice should not certify any financial statement before verification. Our subject at intermediate level was auditing and assurance. First of all, you need to conduct audit, and then after you should give assurance. Without conducting work of audit, straight away if you are giving assurance, you are subject to clause 2 of part 1 of the second schedule. Moving to clause 3. That is similar to clause 2. But clause 2 was applicable for the historic data. Certification without examination of the historic data. Whereas clause 3 is related with the prospective data. It is not related with the historic data, it is related with the prospective data. Many a time, chartered accountant getting such work where he is certifying the future data. Now, how he should verify? For verifying future data, one SAE 3400 issued by ICAI, the name of which Audit of Prospective Financial Information, popularly known as PFI. Now, future data, as and when you certify, before that you need to verify. And while verifying such future data, you need to follow the formalities which are being prescribed under SAE 3400. Without verifying the same, straight away, if you certify such future data, you will be subject to clause 3 of part 1 of the second schedule. If we see the practical related with the same. Z, a chartered accountant, certify a financial forecast of his client, which was forwarded to the client's bank, based on which the bank sanctioned a loan to the client. Clients are asking us to certify future data in 2-3 different situations. When it's a matter of prospectus, when it's a matter of bank loan, or when client wish to know what would be their future after 2-3 years. At that time they prepare the future data and they ask us to certify. At that time, without verification, we can't certify. And how to verify is already given within SAE 3400. You need to keep in mind SAE 3400 is prescribing us the information or the procedures to be conducted for verifying the future data. In this particular question, it is not mentioned whether he has followed SAE 3400 or not. If and only if he has not followed SAE 3400, then only this clause will become applicable and not otherwise. Moving to the next clause. Next clause, clause 4 is saying, a CA in practice cannot give his expression of opinion where he himself, his partner or his firm is having substantial interest. Where he himself, his partner or his firm is having substantial interest. Suppose there is a chartered accountant named X. He is having a partner Y. Now there are 3 firms. X and Company as a proprietor firm, Y and Company as a proprietor firm, and X, Y and Associate, a partnership firm of both. Can X and Company conduct the work of audit of X and Company? Not at all. It is not being permitted. Can X and Company conduct the work of audit of Y and Company? It is also not being permitted, because where there is a substantial interest of a partner. And can X and Company conduct the work of audit of XY and Company, chartered accountant firm, partnership firm? Not at all. So where yourself, your partner or the firm is having substantial interest, you can't give expression of opinion under clause 4, part 1 of the second schedule. If we see the practical related with the same, a firm of chartered accountant was appointed by a company to evaluate the cost of the various product manufactured by it for its information system. One of the partner of the firm was a non-executive director of a company. In a current case, I can say he is not being appointed for audit purpose. He is being appointed for the purpose of evaluation of the cost, and that's why very well he can accept this appointment, and still he is not making violation of clause 4, part 1, second schedule. It would become applicable if it is an audit assignment, certification assignment, assurance assignment. Evaluation of cost for any purpose won't cover under clause 4, part 1, second schedule, and that's why there is no misconduct so far as this question is concerned. Moving to the next question. Mr. B is a practicing chartered accountant holding a valid certificate of practice. He accepted the appointment as a director of the Green One Company Limited. Mr. C, a partner of Mr. B, is a statutory auditor of the said company. Here, I want to cover 2 different clauses. The clause which is ongoing, that is clause 4, part 1, second schedule, which is saying where yourself, your partner, your firm is having substantial interest, you can't give expression of opinion. And second clause which I want to cover, that is a clause 11, part 1, first schedule, which was saying that a CA in practice cannot engage in any business or profession, but yes, he can become a director provided he himself or his partner is not the auditor of the same concern. Now we need to see first, if I am already being appointed as auditor first, he cannot become a director. Under clause 11, my partner cannot become auditor under clause 11, part 1 of the first schedule. But suppose he is already director over there. He is already having substantial interest. I can't become auditor. Under clause 4, part 1, second schedule. Again I want to repeat. Here there is a company where my partner is already a director. Can I be an auditor of the same company? No. Under clause 4, part 1, second schedule. And suppose he is already being auditor of a company. Can I become a director? No. Under clause 11 of part 1 of the first schedule. So if you are already an auditor, he can't become a director. And if he is already a director, you can't become auditor. So here in this particular question, we need to see who became what first. If he is already a director, I can't be auditor under clause 4. I am already auditor, he can't become a director under clause 11, part 1 of the first schedule. Moving to the next clause. Clause 5 is talking about you are not disclosing a material fact, the non-disclosure of which is making the financial statement misleading. You are aware of some fact. Some financial statement should have certain information, and that is not disclosed in that financial statement. You are aware of this fact, but still you are not compelling your client. In that case, clause 5 will become applicable. If I give you an example, client was facing a case in a court of law. It should be disclosed by way of contingent liability, but client has intentionally not disclosed this fact. You are aware of this litigation, then you need to compel your client to disclose this litigation in a contingent liability. If you do not compel, you are subject to clause 5 part 1 of first schedule. One more example I can give you. Clause 5 part 1 second schedule. One more example I can give you, that suppose client's turnover was 1 crore, but intentionally disclosed 90 lakh. I was aware, being a CA in practice, that the turnover is 1 crore. I should compel him, but if I do not compel, I would be covered under clause 5 of part 1 of the second schedule. So I need to compel my client to disclose a material fact, the non-disclosure of which is making the financial statement misleading. If we see the example related with the same, practical related with the same. Mr. Extraordinary, a practicing chartered accountant, had failed to disclose regarding a material claim against the company of which he was aware and which the management intentionally did not include in their financial statement, as it would affect the prices of their share on the stock exchange. Is he guilty of professional misconduct? It is similar to the example what I gave. The company was facing a litigation and they intentionally didn't disclose. The reason behind, if they disclose this fact, their share prices would be affected in a stock exchange. But when I'm aware of this fact, I should compel the company to disclose such material claim. If I do not compel, then clause 5 part 1 second schedule would become applicable to the chartered accountant in practice who is engaged. Second practical related with the same. Mr. Joe, a chartered accountant, during the course of audit of Messrs. XYZ Limited, came to know that the company has taken a loan of rupees 10 lakh from Employees Provident Fund. The said loan was not reflected in the books of account. However, the auditor ignored this information in his report. For this particular matter, I want to convey that the loan which is being taken from the Provident Fund must be reflected in the balance sheet of a company. Company has not disclosed this fact. The non-disclosure of this fact is making the financial statement misleading. So I must compel the company to make a disclosure of the same. But if I do not compel, I would be covered under clause 5 of part 1 of the second schedule. Next clause, if we see, clause 6 is matching with clause 5 in some way. Clause 5 was related with fail to disclose, whereas clause 6 is related with fail to report. But fail to disclose a material fact would become under clause 6 a material misstatement. In a clause 5 the word was material fact, and in clause 6 the word is material misstatement. You need to report on a material misstatement. If you do not report on the material misstatement, clause 6 would become applicable. If I give you the example, the same example, the turnover of the company was 1 crore. They disclosed 90 lakh. We should compel them to make a disclosure of additional 10 lakh. I compel, still they didn't make a disclosure. In that particular case, that material fact has become material misstatement. Now the amount is 90 lakh in a financial statement. And that amount of 90 lakh in a financial statement is a misstatement which needs to be reported. And if I do not report, clause 6 will become applicable. Clause 5 was becoming applicable to me if I do not compel the client. And clause 6 would become applicable to me if I compel the client, still is not disclosing, then I should report. And if I am not reporting, then clause 6 will become applicable. So clause 5, fail to disclose a material fact, and clause 6, fail to report on material misstatement. If we see the practical related with the same. Practical number 1. Alok Nanda is the auditor of a partnership firm consisting of X and Y as a partner. In his audit report to the firm, he did not refer to certain materially irregular transactions found in the books of account of the firm, for the reason that X, the senior partner, had approved all such transactions. I can say it's a combination of clause 5 and 6 both. There are certain materially irregular transactions. I should compel, I should convey, I conveyed, but I conveyed only to one of the partner who was a senior partner and not to both the partner. Wherever I am being appointed in a partnership firm, I am being appointed for a partnership firm and I am not being appointed for any individual partner. In this particular case, you need to remember communication should be made to both the auditors, both the partners. Now I just conveyed to one of the partner. I just compel one of the partner. So partially I followed clause 5 and not completely. And that's why I would be covered under clause 5. Plus, still no action was taken from the side of the partner, then I should have reported on this misstatement, and as I didn't report on this misstatement, and that's why clause 6 of part 1 of second schedule would become applicable. So this is a good case of application of clause 5 and 6 both. Why clause 5 is applied? Because I just compel one of the partner and not both the partners. And clause 6, why it became applicable? Because I didn't report on this misstatement, and that's why clause 6 part 1 second schedule would become applicable. Moving to the next clause, that is clause 7. Till time we were learning about professional misconduct. Now this clause is related with gross negligence. Misconduct is intentional, negligence is unintentional. Are we being punished for something which is done unintentionally? Yes. How can you be negligent being a professional? A common man can be punished only for a misconduct. But professionals like doctor, chartered accountants, lawyers, they are also being punished even for negligent. Being professional, we can't be negligent. Like in a previous clauses, fail to disclose, fail to report, clause 5, clause 6. If done intentionally, in that case I will apply clause 5 and 6. But negligently, I fail to disclose, I fail to report, I won't apply clause 5 and 6, but definitely clause 7 would become applicable to me. You remember, this would become applicable to a chartered accountant where he has not exercised reasonable care and skill. If a chartered accountant in practice is not exercising reasonable care and skill, he is not applying proper diligence, in that case clause 7 would become applicable. There are many practicals related with this clause 7. We will see each practical, but once again I want to convey, for a common person he can be punished only for a misconduct, whereas professionals can be punished for a misconduct as well as negligence both. If we start with a practical number 1, Mr. Falls has been appointed by True Limited to represent them before the taxation authorities and to prepare statement required for the purpose based on the data to be provided by the management. The taxation authority felt that the claim made through the statement prepared by Mr. Falls were incorrect and misleading. Is the CA guilty of professional misconduct or not? In this case, my client is giving me certain statement to be prepared and to be submitted to the income tax authorities. The income tax authorities felt that this information is incomplete. Now, whatever information provided to the income tax department was to the best of my knowledge and according to information and explanation given to the chartered accountant. Now, if some information is not intentionally provided, concealed from the chartered accountant, there is no more responsibility on his part, provided he has exercised reasonable care and skill. But if he has not exercised reasonable care and skill, now what does it mean reasonable care and skill? If he has demanded this information from the client but not provided to him, in that case he is not responsible. But if he failed to demand this information from the client, in that case he would be held responsible. So in a current case, if and only if it is being proved that he has not exercised reasonable care and skill, then only clause 7 part 1 second schedule would become applicable. So basically some statement is submitted to the income tax department which they find it is false. Is there any responsibility on the part of auditor? Auditor prepared all the statement based on the information provided by the client. Either client didn't provide the information or provided the wrong information. There is no duty on the part of auditor provided he exercised reasonable care and skill. But if he has not exercised, clause 7 part 1 second schedule would become applicable. Moving to the second practical. Mr. Fair, a practicing chartered accountant, was appointed to carry out a balance sheet audit of a non-profit making organization. The internal auditor detected certain irregularities at one of the branches of the organization, which Mr. Fair has failed to detect. Is Mr. Fair guilty of professional misconduct? For this particular question, I want to convey, we are being appointed for giving expression of opinion and not for detecting all irregularities, all frauds and errors. Rather, internal auditors are doing extensive audit in comparison with a statutory auditor. So he could discover certain irregularities which statutory auditor failed to detect. Will there be any duty on the part of auditor? He will face the duty if and only if it is being proved that he has not exercised reasonable care and skill. If he has done a good audit, if he has performed the audit with due diligence, in that particular case, there won't be any responsibility on the part of statutory auditor, because the basic objective of statutory auditor is not to detect the irregularities but to give expression about the truth and fairness, and that's why apparently there won't be any duty. But if it is clearly mentioned that he has not exercised reasonable care and skill, in that case clause 7 part 1 second schedule would become applicable to the chartered accountant in a current case. Moving to the next practical. The cashier of a company committed a fraud and absconded with the proceeds thereof. This happened during the course of the accounting year. The chief accountant of the company also did not know about the fraud. In the course of the audit, at the end of the year, the auditor failed to discover the fraud. After the audit was completed, however, the fraud was discovered by the chief accountant. Investigation made at the time indicate that the auditor did not exercise proper skill and care and perform his work in a desultory and haphazard manner. With this background, the directors of the company intend to file disciplinary proceedings against the auditor. Discuss the position of the auditor with regard to the disciplinary proceedings. In a previous answer I said, we are being appointed for giving expression about the truth and fairness and not to discover fraud and error. But the apparent frauds and errors need to be reported, need to be communicated. If it is a matter of error, it should be rectified. If it is a matter of fraud, it should be reported. If I correlate with the Companies Act, section 143(12) would become applicable, which is saying fraud need to be reported to the central government if the amount is more than 1 crore, less than 1 crore to the audit committee. Plus fraud need to be related with the company's organization, its employee, it should be reported within CARO, clause number 10. In a current case, he failed to discover fraud and later on fraud was discovered. And after investigation revealed the fact that he has not performed his job with a due care and skill. He has done his job in a desultory and haphazard manner that clearly indicate his grossly negligence under clause 7 of part 1 of the second schedule. So in a current case, he would be held responsible under clause 7 part 1 of the second schedule. Moving to the next question. Question 4. A chartered accountant sent his report by value paid post to cover the audit fee payable without signing the report. Now basically this question is not covered within PM. It's being very old question. VPP is the service provided by a postal department, where whatever document we send by way of post, the amount would be collected by a postal department and then only the material would be delivered. So it's a conditional delivery. Is it being a case? Not at all. You can send your audit report by way of VPP. Suppose the auditor is staying in Ahmedabad and his client is there in Mumbai. He wants to send the audit report by way of VPP. Can he send? Yes, he can send. And where the report would be delivered if and only if the amount of fees is being paid. So you can't say it's a conditional delivery of the audit report and where CA would be held responsible. But without signing, that indicate gross negligence. Sending by way of VPP is not a fault, but without signing is clearly indicate a gross negligence. In our office, we can find out many audit reports are there without signing. It doesn't have any value unless and until you sign that particular audit report. So when you send the audit report, at that time it must be signed, and you are not signing, it is not happening intentionally, it is always happening unintentionally, but unintentional is covered within gross negligence and it would covered within under clause 7 part 1 of the second schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Moving to the next question. Mr. A chartered accountant, was the auditor of A Limited. During the financial year 2007-8, the investment appeared in the balance sheet of the company of 10 lakhs and was the same amount as in the last year. Later on, it was found that the company's investment were only 25,000, but the value of investment was inflated for the purpose of obtaining the higher amount of bank loan. Now, this question I want to cover 3 different clauses. First of all, investment value was just 25,000, still it was reflected as a 10 lakh. It might be intentional, it might be unintentional. If it is unintentional and if it is being certified by a chartered accountant, clause 7. If it is intentional, I was aware of this fact and still I signed, clause 2 will become applicable, which was related with certification without examination. But certification without examination, only of financial statement would be covered under clause 2. if something is not related with the financial statement and certified without examination, that instead of clause 2, we'll have to apply clause 8, which is our next clause. So I want to bifurcate in two parts. Whatever done, unintentionally done, clause 7. Intentionally done, two options. If it is a matter of financial statement, we can apply clause 2. And if it is other than financial statement was okay, but for a bank loan purpose we drafted another statement and that was being certified by a chartered accountant intentionally, though the amount of investment was 25,000, it was reflected as 10 lakh in that statement. In that case, clause 2 will not be applied, clause 8 will be applied. So 3 clauses are applied. In case of unintentional, clause 7, intentional financial statement, clause 2, and intentional other than financial statement, in that case, clause 8 of part 1 of second schedule, which is our next clause, would become applicable. Moving to the next question. Mr. Mohan is a practicing chartered accountant. He issued a certificate of consumption which did not reflect the correct factual position of the consumption of raw material by the concerned entity. It is found that the certificate is given on the basis of data appearing in the minutes of the meeting of the board of directors. In this particular case, he issued a certificate that was a consumption of raw material. So for that purpose, he should verify the records. Instead of verifying the records, he straight away considered the minute book. Now we know that SA 580 written representation, we can take written representation in a different way, and one of the way of getting written representation is the minute book of the board meeting. Now, so for issuing a certificate, when other alternates are available, you can't rely upon the written representation. Written representation is the last way of generating audit evidences. You might be in hurry to issue the certificate, and that's why in this particular case, without observing the actual records of raw material, on the basis of written representation, you issued the certificate. If it is intentional, then clause 2 will become applicable, and unintentional, then clause 7 will become applicable. If it's a matter intentional, then clause 2, and unintentional, then it would be treated as gross negligence, and clause 7 would become applicable. If we see the next question. Mr. PB, a chartered accountant in practice, is the auditor of UB Limited. He advised the managing director of the company to include order under negotiation in sales to reflect higher profit and better financial position for obtaining the bank loan in future. Mr. PB then after gave clean report on the balance sheet prepared accordingly without examining the accounts. Now, in this particular question, my answer differs with the answer which is given in PM. In PM, they have applied clause 7. Clause 7 can become applicable only in a situation when it is unintentional. Whereas in this question, it is clearly mentioned the auditor himself is advising. In this question, my answer differs with the answer which is given in PM. In PM, it is written clause 7 part 1 second schedule would become applicable. But clause 7 can become applicable if and only if something is unintentional. In a current question, it is clearly mentioned that the chartered accountant himself is advising that order under negotiation should be included in the turnover, so that you can have a better financial position. So the things what is being done is not done unintentionally, it is done intentionally, and that's why instead of applying clause 7, we should apply clause 2. Clause 2 part 1 second schedule should become applicable. Instead of that, in a PM, it is mentioned clause 7 part 1 second schedule. But we need to follow what is written in PM, and that's why we will also apply clause 7 part 1 second schedule. Moving to the next question. Mr. PB, a practicing chartered accountant, did not complete his work relating to the audit of the accounts of a company and had not submitted his report in due time to enable the company to comply with the statutory requirement. It is quite possible when you have a good amount of clientele. Being a chartered accountant in practice, you need to maintain a record. How many audits are completed? What is left pending? Chartered accountants should be aware of the due dates. Client may not be aware. In this particular case, suppose client has not provided the record, you should issue a qualified report. You can't withhold the submission of the tax audit report or statutory audit report. In case of a tax audit, we are aware up to the due date. If you are not submitting the tax audit report, in that case that SSC is subject to penalty of 0.5% of turnover of subject to maximum of 1,50,000. He is not aware of the due date. He is not aware what information is required by the chartered accountant. You need to demand and you need to make sure that information is being made available to you. And even if the information is not being provided, you must issue the audit report before the due date with a qualification. In a current case, you have not issued the audit report, you forgot to conduct the work of audit. Usually it is not happening intentionally, it is happening unintentionally, and that's why unintentional clause 7, part 1 of the second schedule would become applicable in a current case. Moving to the next clause. Clause 8. In some way it is related with clause 2. The basic difference I will explain. First of all, there are two parts of clause 8. Number 1, you are not generating enough information to warrant your expression. Whenever you are giving expression, you need to have enough information. What is enough? Difficult to decide. But I can give you example. If there are 1 lakh transaction, out of which if the auditor is checking 30-40,000, it's a good enough audit he has done. But out of 1 lakh transaction, if he's just checking 1, that is also a test audit. But still it is not good enough information to warrant his expression, to support his expression. So if a chartered accountant is not generating enough information to warrant his expression, in that case clause 8 would become applicable. And second situation, if he is taking such a big exception which nullify the effect of his expression. Being a chartered accountant, in practice being an auditor, I can take few exceptions. I can give you example of two different types of report, a qualified report and exceptional report. In a qualified report, we are writing, I express this financial statement reflect true and fair view subject to. And after writing subject to, we are writing the points of qualification, reservation. But if you are writing word subject to first and true and fair view later, then it won't be a qualified report, rather it would be treated as exceptional report. I can give you example, I have not verified investment. Subject to, I express this financial statement reflect true and fair view. So this is not a qualified report, this is an exceptional report. Can I take such kind of exception? Yes, I can take such kind of exception, but you can't take such a big exception which nullify the effect of your expression. You can't write, I have not checked even a single transaction, subject to, I express this financial statement reflect true and fair view. You can't take such a big exception which nullify the effect of expression. So clause 8 would become applicable in two situations. Number 1, you are not generating enough information to warrant your expression. And number 2, you are taking such a big exception which nullify the effect of the expression. In both situations, clause 8, part 1, second schedule would become applicable. How it differs from clause 2? I want to clarify, both are related with certification without examination. But if certification related with examination of a financial statement, then clause 2 will become applicable. And if certification without examination other than financial statement, in that case clause 2 will not become applicable, rather clause 8 will become applicable. So if a matter of financial statement, apply clause 2 part 1 second schedule, and if matter other than financial statement, apply clause 8 part 1 second schedule. If we see the practicals related with the same. Mr. Jam, a practicing chartered accountant, certified the circulation of a Good Luck, a weekly magazine, without examination of financial records and other required document. You might be aware of one of the concept which is known as TRP for the electronic media. A similar kind of concept is there in print media which is known as ABC, Audit Bureau of Circulation, where every newspaper, every magazine, to what extent it is being circulated, needs to be certified, and that certification work is being given to the chartered accountant. Suppose a chartered accountant is getting such kind of work of a Goodly weekly magazine. Now in that Good Luck weekly magazine, now in that particular case, if he is certifying the information without carrying necessary examination, he is not making a violation of clause 2, because he is not certifying any financial statement, rather he is certifying circulation of a magazine, and that's why we cannot apply clause 2, rather we'll have to apply clause 8 part 1 second schedule of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. So in a current case, clause 8 part 1 second schedule would become applicable. Moving to the next question. Mr. DD, a practicing chartered accountant, issued a circulation certificate for a periodical on the basis of outward memos which was later found to be false. Once again, this question is similar. Periodicals, magazines, newspaper that need to, its circulation need to be certified, which is known as ABC, Audit Bureau of Circulation. Now this certification is done if without necessary examination. In that particular case, we can't apply clause 2. Again, we'll have to apply clause 8 part 1 of second schedule. If something is related with financial statement, apply clause 2, and if something is related other than financial statement, apply clause 8. But both situations would be for intentional, and the same thing if done unintentional, instead of clause 2 and 8, you will have to apply clause 7 part 1 second schedule. Moving to the next clause. Clause 9 is talking about whenever any audit is being conducted, auditing standards are normally being followed. Under Companies Act, requirement of section 143 bracket 9 and 10 is asking company auditor to follow SA. SA, if not followed, you need to disclose this fact, and if disclosure is not made, clause 9 part 1 second schedule would become applicable. I want to clarify. SA not followed is not crime under clause 9. But this fact, if you are not disclosing, it's a crime under clause 9. Clause 9 won't become applicable if you are not following SA. But clause 9 would become applicable if you are not disclosing this fact. We are drafting our audit report. Audit report is being drafted as per SA 700, where one of the paragraph is auditor's responsibility paragraph, where a first sentence always we are writing, you have conducted our work of audit with the auditing standards generally accepted in India, means auditing standards, SA. If we have not followed SA, we need to write at that particular place, we have not conducted our work of audit with auditing standards generally accepted in India. If we are not writing, then only clause 9 would become applicable. If we are not following, clause 9 won't become applicable. But if we are not writing, clause 9 part 1 of second schedule would become applicable. But there is no specific question related with this particular clause. Moving to clause 10, which is a last clause in a part 1 of the second schedule, which is applicable to CA in practice. Clause 10 is saying any money belonging to the client need to be deposited in a separate bank account. Number 1. And number 2, it should be utilized for the purpose for which it was given. You will be held responsible in either of these two situations. If money belonging to the client, if you are not depositing in a separate bank account, then clause 10 would be applied. And even if you are deposited in a separate bank account, but if it is not being utilized for the purpose for which it was given, again clause 10 would become applicable. Suppose client was going abroad and he gave you 10 lakhs rupees for making tax saving investment. Now tax saving investment should be made before 31st March. If you deposit this amount in your own bank account, clause 10 would become applicable. Suppose you deposited this amount in a separate bank account, in that case you need to utilize up to the due date, that is 31st March, but up to 31st March no amount was utilized. In that particular case, again clause 10 part 1 second schedule would become applicable. So clause 10 is becoming applicable in two situations. If money belonging to the client is not being utilized for the purpose for which it was given, and if it is not being deposited in a separate bank account. But if any amount is given as a fees or as an expense for the auditor, so that is the amount of the auditor, it can be deposited in his own normal bank account. If the amount is related with the audit fees, if the amount is related with the expenses, it can be deposited in a normal bank account, and there is nothing wrong under clause 10 part 1 of the second schedule. Now if we see the practicals related with the same. Practical number 1. A charitable institution entrusted rupees 10 lakhs with the auditors, Messrs. Ram and Company, a chartered accountant firm, to invest in a profitable portfolio. The auditors pending investment of the money deposited it in their savings bank account, and no investment was made in the next 3 months. In this case, there are two outcomes. Number 1, the amount is being deposited in a normal savings bank account and not in a separate bank account. And that's why clause 10 will become applicable. Now apparently there is no deadline given in this question for the purpose of making investment. But 3 months can be treated as a reasonable time period for making investment. And that's why a CA in practice would be covered under clause 10 of part 1 of the second schedule because of two reasons. Number 1, the amount is not being deposited in a separate bank account. And number 2, that it is not being utilized for the purpose for which it was given up to the reasonable time period. And that's why clause 10 part 1 second schedule would become applicable. Moving to the next question. Mrs. R is a chartered accountant in practice. She looked after the tax matter of Mr. R, her husband. He gave her rupees 25,000, saying that the amount was intended for her personal expenses and also for payment of his self-assessment tax. He promised that he would furnish details of his income, etc. within a week to enable her to calculate the tax. Later it came to be known that Mrs. R had spent 20,000 on the purchase of a necklace, and as a result of there was a shortage of funds for payment of self-assessment tax by rupees 3,000. A furious Mr. R makes a complaint to the institute about the conduct of his wife as a chartered accountant. This is being a unique case, not given in PM. Here, she is chartered accountant handling the taxation matter of her husband. She is not only a chartered accountant, but she is also a wife. An amount was given for a dual purpose, for personal expenses as well as for the payment of self-assessment tax. Now, the details for calculation of self-assessment tax was not provided by the husband. As it wasn't provided by the husband, it was open for her to make use of this amount for any purpose, and she purchased necklace out of this amount. And that's why later on there was a shortage of fund to the extent of 3,000. Whether she will be held responsible? Not at all. Because she is not only a chartered accountant in practice, but she is also a wife. And the amount was given for a dual purpose, and that's why it was open for her to make use of this fund for either purpose. Number one. But if in a current case, if we make a little change, if the amount of self-assessment tax is already determined, still if she is making a use of this fund for purchase of necklace, in that case, Clause 10 Part 1 second schedule would become applicable. When the amount is already being fixed, first it should be utilized for that fixed purpose and not for the purpose of purchasing necklace. But in a current case, as the amount of self-assessment tax was not decided, the reason behind the details were not being provided by the husband, and that's why she is not at a fault, and that's why we can't apply Clause 10 Part 1 of second schedule won't become applicable so far as this question is concerned. Moving to the next question. SLP and Company, a firm of chartered accountant, are auditors of Acme Chemical Private Limited, who were negotiating for the purchase of another chemical manufacturing unit. SLP and Company are helping the company in this negotiation, and for that purpose, the company has advanced rupees 1 lakh to SLP and Company for incurring various expenses from time to time. SLP and Company have deposited the said sum of 1 lakh in their normal bank account and are spending the money therefrom time to time. Explain whether the firm can be deemed guilty of professional misconduct. The answer would be yes, because the amount belonging to the client should be utilized and should be utilized for the purpose for which it was given. And the second criteria, it should be deposited in a separate bank account and it should not be deposited in a normal bank account. As in a current case, it was being deposited in a normal bank account, and that's why Clause 10 Part 1 second schedule would become applicable. Moving to the next question. Messrs. XYZ, a firm of chartered accountant, received 2 lakhs in January 2006 on behalf of one of their clients who has gone abroad and deposited the amount in the bank account so that they can return the money to the client in July 2006 when he is due to return to India. Again, this question is similar to the previous question. Money belonging to the client should be deposited in a separate bank account. It should not be deposited in a normal bank account, as it is not being deposited in a separate bank account, and that's why Clause 10 Part 1 second schedule would become applicable. Moving to the next question. Mr. PB, a chartered accountant in practice, received rupees 15 lakhs on 15 December 2014 on behalf of one of his clients who has gone to USA. Mr. PB deposited the said amount in his saving bank account. As per instruction of the client, the said amount is to be returned to the client on 31st March 2015 when he will return to India. On the occasion of birthday of his wife Sita, Mr. PB withdraw rupees 5 lakhs and spend on birthday party. He redeposited 5 lakhs in the said SB account on 25th of March 2015, and then they returned the entire amount of 15 lakhs to the client on 31st March 2015. There are two parts to this question. Number one, it should be deposited in a separate bank account which is not being deposited, and that's why straight away Clause 10 would become applicable. And second part, that this amount should be utilized for the purpose for which it was given. Now client has just given this amount for a safe custody and not for any other reason. So it should not be utilized for any purpose. But still he made a use of this amount for the birthday party of his wife, and then after he redeposited the same amount. But still we can say he utilized this amount for some other purpose other than the purpose for which it was given, because the purpose for which it was given was nothing but a safe custody. So in a current case, there is a violation of clause 10 of part 1 of second schedule because the amount is not being utilized for the purpose for which it was given, and second, the amount is not being deposited in a separate bank account, and that's why clause 10 would become applicable in a current case. Now, I want to give you a complete recall of all 10 clauses of part 1 of the second schedule. Part 1 is applicable to CA in practice, where clause 1 related with confidentiality, we can't disclose the confidential information related with client unless permitted by client or demanded by court of law. Second, certification without examination of financial statement. Third, certification without examination of the prospective data. Fourth, where the auditor himself, his partner or firm is having substantial interest, he can't give expression of opinion. 5, fail to disclose a material fact, the non-disclosure of which is making the financial statement misleading. 6, fail to report a material misstatement. 7, grossly negligent in respect of his professional duties. 8, not generating enough information to warrant expression or taking such a big exception which nullify the effect of expression. 9, departure from auditing standard need to be disclosed. And 10, use of funds related with client must be made for the purpose for which it was given, and it must be deposited in a separate bank account. That's a part 1 of the second schedule. Now we are moving for the second part, which is related to CA in general.
If you like this video, share it with your friends. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch more such videos and learn from our expert faculty members. Press the bell icon to get regular notifications whenever we upload a new video. Download NDI mobile app to get complete CA course online. We value your support. Thank you for watching.